August 6, 2026 is a date that we are all observing very closely, and it is today. Why is it so important for everyone who's interested in Tesla and also, of course, even more important, SpaceX, the all-decisive company that brings AI into space and replaces the bottleneck of terrestrial AI build out through the new AI satellites as early as 2028, in my assessment at least. Well, we are watching today's date so closely because of this graphic that you're seeing right here. SpaceX just went public, was a very big, the biggest IPO in history, $2 trillion, a crazy story. And what happened today is that for the first time, we saw shares being unlocked. Okay, and what that means is, you probably know what it means, but when you bring 5% of the share float, 5% of the total 13 billion shares that are SpaceX in total, when you bring them on the stock exchange on the IPO day, they are still 95% of the entire share base that need to get unlocked. And every time they get unlocked, a batch of them, they become tradable. And the problem with that in theory is that every time something unlocks like that, it's pure selling pressure because no one can buy them. You can only sell them because you already hold them. These are employees, investors, all kinds of people. And these unlocks, in theory, created a cloud that was hovering over the stock because when you have these huge unlocks, they get sold into the market and the shares could potentially sell off. And the problem is that we had these very high amounts of unlocks, right? So what we are basically seeing is that we are getting nearly 1 billion shares, 900 million shares today online into the market. And this is the first wave of giant unlocks. More shares get unlocked today than are trading right now. And the scare was, will that lead to a sell-off? And I had no answer to that, by the way. I thought that these unlocks will create selling pressure because how could they not? Because even if you're the most bullish employee on SpaceX, your wealth advisors are going to tell you if you now are worth $3 million and you make 100,000 a year or 200,000 and can save 20,000 a year, now you have 3 million in net worth in these shares. Every wealth advisor is going to tell you, sell them to diversify, sell at least some, maybe 10%. But even if 10% of the 900 million would have been sold today, that would have been a total share crash. Okay. So let's look at the stock. What does the stock actually do? It's sold off after earnings, but today it is up. The stock is up even 2.6%, not bad. After earnings, we saw a sell-off. Here were earnings, very good earnings in my opinion. That's a whole different story that we will cover in the weekly brief in Pioneer Lands. We will have some videos up over the weekend, also available on YouTube, where we just cover some of these things and more in-depth in the weekly brief on pioneerlands.org. But you saw the stock running up like crazy on the day into earnings, probably because something leaked and people knew it's good earnings. So it ran up 10% and then dropped 10% more or less, 11%, and then ran up again a little bit yesterday. So today, the big story here is, the big story today is that the stock is up 2.6%, 2.58% right now as we speak. So that will be positive into the close probably when you see this video. And for me, this is a very important signal. It is a very important signal. The signal has not concluded yet. I'm not ready to do the full assessment. I will wait until next week because an unlock doesn't mean everyone just storms into selling the shares today. There will be some selling pressure over the next 7 days or something, I would assume. So we need to sit back and observe that a little bit. And it's time to observe that very diligently because that first unlock today will tell us a lot. I'm giving it a week. If I don't see any distortions over the next week, if this goes flat or up, that is a very good sign that the future unlocks will not create any additional disturbances. And that means we have a green light, a go on the stock to actually just look at the stock, the fundamentals, and do our assessment, which we already did. I'm not going to reveal what it is, if it's a buy or a sell, because we are not ready yet. But we have completed the analysis nearly. We will be ready on Sunday in the Pioneer Lands analyst team. and reveal what we think, including the build-out projections for compute. But we need to get this cloud away from over our heads as SpaceX interested investors if these unlocks will create a sell-off. So far, it doesn't look like it. Let's give it another 5 trading days, and then we can conclude what we think. Now, I have looked up here this nice Business Insider article. I want to go through this with you just to get a feel for it. I found it a very useful description, and they interviewed a bunch of employees. It's a very qualitative piece, so it's not a quantitative exact scientific assessment of the selling pressure, but it gives us a good understanding of at least some of the employees and what they're thinking. So let me read it with you. Let's go through this so we get a feel for how bad the sell-off could be or why it might not be happening. So let's get started. The lockup killed me. Early SpaceX investors say they're torn about whether to hold on or cash out as lockups expire. Very good article, by the way. Ryan D. was briefly a millionaire this summer, thanks primarily to his holdings of SpaceX stock. The 34-year-old former SpaceX employee was tracking the rise and fall of Elon Musk's rocket company as the stock soared, then crashed in the days following its record-breaking IPO. He had received 2,800 shares in 2019 when they were valued at around $4 each. Okay, very important for you guys to understand. This guy got 2,800 shares, $4 each valued, very typical employee grant. According to financial records he shared with Business Insider, bringing the total value of his stake to over $630,000 when the stock peaked at $225. Twice as high as it is now, nearly exactly twice as high. Okay, that worth $630,000 is about half that right now. So it's now down to $315,000. This immense IPO hype has fizzled nearly 2 months later with space stocks, blah, 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 falling 50%. We saw this happening. Here you see the stock chart, not news to anyone watching this channel. You see that it peaked here. I sold a bunch of calls at 180 and at 220 because I knew this is like stupid. So I sold a bunch of calls, made the money, nothing game changing, but just a nice little game you can play. Ryan hasn't touched his stake and doesn't plan anytime soon. Okay, that's the important message. And I think that is one of the reasons why people might not be selling. They saw 225, now it's half of that. They're saying, this is not very enticing to sell. Let's wait, I'm sure it's gonna go up again. Despite the post-IPO slide, early investors in Musk's rocket company are still way up on their holdings given the company's valuation. Remember, Ryan got the shares at $4. Maybe he has to still execute them, maybe not, doesn't matter, but he has to pay $4. So even if he sells now, he makes nearly the entire $315,000 in profit. So that volatility could get worse as more insider shares are unlocked through the end of the year, leaving some people who got in early torn about whether they should continue. And I think, to take a break here, I think one reason why we are not seeing selling is the low share price. We probably would see a bigger drop if we were higher up. But if you have seen already your stake at $600,000, you have much more inhibition selling it at $300,000. Imagine it would have gone up to 600,000 and now it would be at $1 million. Ryan would probably say, okay, let's get the hell out of here. But down here, so that is the psychology of the seller, very important. Let's see. Business Insider spoke to 3 early SpaceX shareholders about how they felt about the stock's rise and fall. Business Insider verified each investor's stake through screenshots and documents. Ryan said he was bullish on SpaceX's long-term trajectory overall. As a former employee, he's familiar with the company's leadership and has faith that management will get the company through the current phase. Dominated by heavy R&D spend, we know all of that. Hey, on this channel, we do something very important. We deeply analyze, understand, and predict capital, AGI, and politics. Not just to beat the markets and make a lot of money, even though that's important, but also to build a new society and make the future good for all of us, the pioneers. If you want to help me on this journey, you can do that by doing a very simple thing. Like and subscribe. It helps me a lot. Thank you so much for your support, and let's get back to the video. Okay. I've seen how the company works from the inside, he said. My thoughts are long-term. I think it's probably going to be good. I mean, who's betting against Elon? Let's continue. Chris Dennard, a 43-year-old business owner based in Florida, said he got first involved with SpaceX in 2022 when someone in his group of entrepreneurs and business people hooked up members with private investment funds that offered exposure to SpaceX. He invested $25,000 in SpaceX's Series M funding round, valued at $19 a share. So he is up 5.5x. A stake that ballooned to around $260,000 post-IPO peak and now is at 100-something thousand, right? The lockup killed me, Dennard said. So here see, Dennard wanted to sell, would have sold at $225, but now he doesn't want to. Prior to the first wave of insider lockups expiring, Dennard told businesses he was planning to sell around $25,000 worth of the stock, the size of his initial investment, to take some profits. I had such a great entry point, I already won. Dennard said he would consider selling more in the future due to concerns about the stock's volatility. If shares started to tumble below the $50 mark, he would call it quits and exit his stakes. Interesting psychology. He said, though he believed it was more likely the stock would stabilize and start rising from here. I'm just going to let it ride, he added. So he's in, he doesn't sell. Number 3, Lance Breitstein, a day trader investor based in California, is just another early investor who says he would have loved to dump his stock when it peaked in June. Okay, Breitstein purchased $500,000 worth of SpaceX stock through an SPV in 2024. Many such people, many such cases. Around the time SpaceX was valued at $210 billion, his stake is now worth over $3 million. Breitstein said he wasn't stressed about SpaceX's post-IPO decline given how early he bought in. Though he believes the business will likely succeed over the long term, he has doubts about whether he wants to stomach the interim volatility and adds that he expects the stock to come under more pressure as shares are unlocked. He said he would consider selling his stock if SpaceX were to rebound to around $130 per share, a level he said would be ideal for him to take profits. Very interesting. I think most of the early stage investors, they were in it for the asymmetry. And now that it's gone with these lockups, I do think a lot of people are going to be eager to say, hey, we capture that bulk of this trade and let's ring the register, he said. Okay, I think this article gives us a good qualitative insight. Here's Breitstein. What is going on? And I think we should not overfit on 3 cases, but I think we can learn a bunch of things here. Let's go back to the stock and see it lingering around today. Here's my takeaway. How I will handle this. I'm not in, I mean, I have a tiny tracker position of 10 shares. I always buy 10 shares when I'm interested in the stock to see it in my portfolio and can track it. So, I actually put on a short put position today because I'm a little bit bullish after what I see, but a very tiny one to see what happens. Just a bunch of short puts out of the money. Not much, I think 108 weekly, because I want to get a feel for what's going on here. And I think the stock is truly doing price discovery right now after the earnings call and now the first unlock. So I want to be a little exposed and get a feel for it. But here's the thing. I think down here, as evidence today and maybe evidence over the next few days, the selling pressure is extremely limited because everyone has seen what the stock can do at 220. The other important anchor point to what is it? Breitstein. What's his name? Breitstein. To Breitstein's case, now it is about early investor psychology. We should not underestimate how many of these shares are now available out there. And the question is, when will they actually start selling? We see now early evidence that the price is too low for most people. No one is selling. Everyone says, no, I've seen 225, I'm not going to sell at 110. But Breitstein indicated already his psychology. He said, when this stock goes back to IPO price of 135, where I was not allowed to sell because it was a lockup, I'm going to sell. That's what he said. So we have to watch these important levels. it is very likely that we see a bump, that we see resistance, selling resistance. And don't underestimate how much is actually getting unlocked here. I think we are now at a 5x or something. No, 2x. Something big. I have to look it up. Let's do it while we speak. So there is a massive amount being unlocked right now. And I think what happens is the first resistance for the stock going higher, and I think it will, because the fundamentals look actually very promising, as I hinted at. Explain how many shares got unlocked today for SpaceX and how many floated before. So no, 900 million unlock, I'm pretty sure. Let's see what Grok says about what the exact float is previous to the unlock. But I think watch the 130 level, 130 to 140, specifically 135 IPO price. I would predict there is some selling pressure going into 135, which for us is very important, which means to the downside, we are a little bit protected. Of course, not if the market crashes, but from here, if I see stabilization around 110, 105, 115, 120, I would take that as a good bottom. And then I would expect selling pressure to increase towards 135, meaning the stock can easily go up to that. And then we'll have a hard time breaking through that resistance in theory, because that's where all these people are waiting and are starting to sell. So the float before today's unlock was 639 million shares. So there you have it. So we had 639 million total shares floating, being traded. And today another 900 million came on top. So over 100% added. Okay, that's pretty significant. So it only represented 4.9% roughly of all shares, the initial float of 638 million. And now we unlocked the other 900 million. So now we are up to 12% or something of total shares being traded. And I think that's the big takeaway here. Let's look how this stock stabilizes over the next week. That forms like a bottom, at least from a pure SpaceX perspective, if you not consider the market dynamics, like the larger macro dynamics of the NASDAQ and so on. And then I would expect good news driving this thing further up. I expect a lot of good news. And it makes me pretty bullish on this stock between 110 here. And I think we'll get to 120 probably very quickly. So there's not too much upside left. But then the next big resistance, 135. That is what I would expect. And that means we might be able to bet on that and say, let's take this little ride up to 135. But first, we need to see it stabilize over the next 5 days. Hopefully not too late. I hope it doesn't go up to 120, but let's see. That can easily happen. So that is my take on the SpaceX situation. Here's the lockup table again. If you want to know more, we have a SpaceX full financial model coming up in our investment research section in Pioneer Lands next week. I'm pretty sure we can get it done by next week, at least the first version of it, plus a analyst brief. So you understand how we are thinking around that stock. And we will cover the stock in our weekly brief that's coming out over the weekend, also on Pioneer Lands and on YouTube, because the earnings call gave us very important insights into the actual compute build out schedule for 2026. You know, I did a video right before the earnings call with my predictions and our modeling, where I completely disputed that crazy claim that we get to 8 gigawatts end of next year, which would be ridiculously large. Of course, Elon then came out in the earnings call like, whoa, it's going to be between 5 and 10 gigawatts end of 2027, closer to 10 than to 5. I absolutely do not believe that, Elon. I think you will come in much lower than that. But still, coming in much lower than that still means a massive increase in EBIT, in earnings. So we will discuss all of that in the weekly brief in more detail. So stay tuned and see you then.